Hi, I'm Gracie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumphs. In this episode, I'm talking with Sarayu Blue, an Indian-American actress who talks about colorism in her community and working in Hollywood. Now, this episode was recorded remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there are a few audio glitches. I sincerely apologize for that and hope you can still enjoy our intimate conversation we titled Not Light Enough. First, let's start by how we know each other. We've only seen each other in real life once.
Yes.
So we have a mutual friend in Lacey Chabert.
Yes.
And we were both at an event with her and sat at a table together and became Instagram friends.
Yeah.
So we randomly kind of know each other, but I think you're freaking amazing and I love everything you do. And so I wanted to talk to you especially and get, as an Indian American woman, your take on your not enoughness and things that maybe you've experienced and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's so exciting. And I think you're equally amazing. And it's been so fun actually getting to know each other. I think that it's such a bizarre way to get to know each other. And yet, because we have this inherent connection and did meet in person. And I think obviously we're very different, but we have a lot in common in terms of things that matter to us and lifestyles and so it's exciting. And I like that you're doing this idea of not enough. When you're a person of color, I think a lot of interviews lend themselves to going in this direction. What I found was there can be a little bit of like trauma in reliving some of those experiences. But when I'm speaking with somebody who there's an understanding and there's a collaborative dialogue, it's actually really delightful and refueling. And it's interesting, when you first brought it to me, I was looking at it and I thought, yes, this is fantastic. This is so great. I feel like too much. I've always felt, I've had a different twist of that, I guess.
You were the first person out of the people I reached out to in my initial reach out who said, sorry, you said to me, I don't often feel like I'm not enough. In fact, I feel the opposite. I feel like I'm too much. And to me that and I'm like, oh, I get that too. But then I challenge you to say well, is that inherently sometimes feeling like maybe you're not American enough or not light enough or not any of these typical standards of beauty of what we should look like, of what we should be like?
I mean, I think that's that's exactly it. It's just it feels different in my perspective, but it is the same thing. It's a different side of the same coin. And I think, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. So I grew up around a lot of white people, and there was an Indian American community there. And it's a very, very progressive liberal college town, which has its pluses and its minuses. I think the reason I did often, especially in the entertainment industry, the reason I say I felt like too much was I was too dark. I did look not like, I always say the way Indians were presented, which was so few and far between, but we're looking like what I call the live action Princess Jasmine, right? They were very fair skinned, big eyes, straight hair, very, just not what I am. I mean, I'm dark skinned. I have small features. I'm very South Indian looking. I have curly hair. One of the things I always talk about when I'm shooting, I've made it a thing of I really want my hair to be curly. I want my hair to be curly because growing up, I never saw Indians with curly hair, but I knew I was one. So I like seeing that, and I think that's where that came from. But absolutely, you could say that it turns into I wasn't light enough. I don't know even what the language is.
Yeah, the representation of what's acceptable by Americans or the United States.
Exactly. Thank you.
I'm so there with you as an Afro-Latina, a dark-skinned Latina, which you never see on TV. Even still, we barely are represented. And that same issue of, oh, I'm not light enough to be considered Latina. I don't have the straight, long, wavy hair. I have the bigger features. I have the more Afro features than the more European features that are in my ancestry. And that same thing of feeling like, especially in entertainment, oh, I can never be cast as what I am.
That's it. And it's so interesting how damaging that messaging was for so many years on this earth. for me. And I assume for you, and I'm sure we both, and many people out there who haven't seen themselves continue to feel. But, you know, the conversation was always around, I wasn't hot enough. I wasn't this enough. I wasn't, you know, attractive enough. And it took so much work for me to get to the place of, oh, that's by a certain standard. That's just a subjective opinion, and that it's meaningless. And it's so hard to believe that, right? When you're literally not getting opportunities because of that. But the truth is that's just a fucking spin. You know, that's some shitty PR that we've been fed. But, you know, it meant so much to me to get to do I Feel Bad or send me the roles I've gotten to do, because the representation that I was getting to show in those moments is so much more. It's so much bigger than just the role or just the show.
I would love for you to talk more about I Feel Bad. So, Sarayu was the lead in an NBC sitcom that if I'm correct, was supposed to be for a white woman.
Yep.
And my girl beat out everyone else and got to play this part as an Indian American woman. And then in the show, you're married to a white guy, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So then you have your Indian family on the show, which then they must have had to adjust, obviously, all the casting because of it. Tell me a little bit about that experience and what that felt like and what that was like.
It was pretty monumental. And it's one that I often find myself sort of still being like, oh my God, that happened, right? Because yes, it was technically written. I mean, I suppose arguably it was written as whoever, any ethnicity. But we all know in the industry, the lead role, that's usually going to be a straight offer to somebody who's a name. And more often than not, the people who have the opportunities to become names are white people. You know, just in general, that's sort of the hierarchy of how it goes. Because there's just more opportunities for them to build those resumes. And so, you know, here was this role. And I remember reading the script and going, oh my God, like this, I can do this. I can do this. And I went in to read for it, and Blue always makes fun of me for the story because, well, not makes fun of me, but teases me because I called him right after and I was just like, babe, I think I nailed it. He was like, babe, that's so great. Can you please pull over? Like, he was like, I'm so proud of you, but please don't be driving, right?
Right. Please come home alive.
Yeah. He was like, you are out of your body.
That's so great.
But it was that moment that I was like, I know I did this thing. I know I did what I had to do. However, there's still the testing process. And it was clearly, you know, not written Indian. And so I think it was like maybe a week and a half or so later, and I got the call to test, and I went into the testing room, and it was 3 white women and me. And I was like, you know, you have this moment, right? Where you go, well, on the plus side, they're either going that way or this way. Like, I know it's not personal, whatever, if I don't get it.
Right.
But I also knew that it would require a real leap of faith on the part of NBC, you know, because these monoliths don't tend to think in terms of, do I want to invest in this? You know, it's a risk. Mostly because I just wasn't a big household name too. You know, I think there's also, it's not like I came with a big following. And that in and of itself is hard for anyone. And so I came in and I tested, and Paul Adelstein was my husband on the show, and he and I just had like an immediate chemistry. It was just so obvious that we had the same, you know, that just the timing was so right there. And later that night I got the call, and it was like everyone felt it. The whole team. I
just got chills when you said that. Because I know, like, what a huge deal. I mean, it's such a huge deal to book the lead in a network pilot anyway. But to do it and walk into a screen test knowing that it's you and 3 white girls.
Yeah.
And they probably want to go white, but you went in there and said, no. I'm the woman for this job, and fucking got it. And that's incredible.
It was an incredibly, like, it was a shift in the tides like I'd never seen. And I always say this to people who are underrepresented in general in TV, film, theater, all of it. More often than not, we are not repped as though we're going to be stars. More often than not, we are repped as though, hey, but you got something. So that's great. Take the crumbs, you know? And so what happened in that moment was a shift in the tides that even my reps kind of woke up, right? And went, oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Oh man.
So it was crazy. And then when the pilot got picked up, I mean, there's just this really funny video of me like on the floor, just like basically just like.
So many pilots get made every year, but very few actually get picked up and go to network television and, you know, are on air so that the world can see them. And so the fact that you get a pilot is huge and like winning the lottery. But for that pilot to then get picked up and actually go to network is like, what?
And I think too, like another thing is like, so yes, they did end up changing the script, and Asim Batra was our showrunner, who's also Indian American. And you know, what you found is like they changed the script, but they also didn't, I mean, it changed drastically from when I read for it, because we know pilots go like through all sorts of changes, but the actual changing of the characters, there was a way that it changed so much. And then it also didn't change that much if you think about it, because the story is still so universal.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, and I may be wrong, so I'm fully willing to admit if I am. But first of all, I'm only the second Indian American woman to ever headline a network show, network comedy. I should make that specific because it was Mindy Kaling.
Oh, right.
But no, she of course had to create her own show to make that happen.
Right, of course.
But I think also we're one of the only shows that had an Indian family as the focal point of every episode. Because it wasn't his parents that were most of the storyline. It was mine, you know, and it was our family and our kids. And so we did a lot of like making of history with that show. And it will always mean so much to me because of that. I mean, it was just really, it was kind of game changing.
I will say because I totally Wikipedia'd you, I saw that you were, from Madison. And I was a little surprised because you just seemed like such a like big city girl to me.
I know. I'm such a city girl. I am. At heart, I'm such a city girl.
So tell me more about that experience and growing up being one of probably the only Indian girls in your class or school and what that was like.
It's interesting. It's interesting because when you're growing up in it, you don't know anything else, right? So as I grew up in it, I'm not sure if I had the awareness around what the experience was until I was out of it. And then when I was out of it, I started having a lot more understanding of like, oh, that made me not feel seen. That made me feel ugly. That made me feel, you know, there were certain experiences because I was so outside of so much that made me feel like not enough or too much, either way. And then I was also lucky that like the friends that I've maintained from Madison and that are still my close, you know, sisters in arms, are people who have really grown and developed a real language with me around some of those things, you know? And again, we did have the Indian American community and the Indian Association. And so I think it was an interesting experience, but I don't know. I don't know if I really understood what it was while I was in it.
Did you have the thing? Because I mean, even though I grew up in New York and I grew up in Brooklyn and then Manhattan, that's why I say it's so funny. People are always like, oh, what was it like growing up in such a big city? And honestly, when I talk to people like, for instance, you who grew up in a smaller place, the stories are not that different. You know, there's still, like, I think no matter where you grow up, there's still that feeling. And I think this is also definitely for people of color, but I also think white people go through this too. It's just this feeling of not feeling like you belong for whatever reason that might be, just feeling like you're outside of the circle. And being darker skinned, to me, I feel like you get these images. And so I always felt like a fear of getting too tan in the summer.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I think, well, Indian culture has a very huge problem around dealing with light skin and dark skin. And that has been, now I was lucky that my parents politically are incredibly progressive. And I understand that that is not the experience of a lot of Indian Americans. But I also know that, like, so when it came to like looks or beauty or those things, you know, their primary focus for me was taking care of my mind, you know, like just making sure that I was like learning and growing and, you know, all those kinds of things. So they never really, there wasn't a lot of like, you're pretty or you're this or those kind of compliments are not a part of our culture, you know, like my parents don't sit around being like, how can I make you feel good about yourself? Like, that's not going to happen in our household. Our household was a harsh household. And I was definitely not the important one when it came to, like, it was like, there was a clear hierarchy and my mama was the star. Here's the thing. My mom was 36 when they got married.
Oh, wow.
38 when she had me. My mom has 2 master's degrees. My dad's a professor. Like, their big thing was like, just please don't embarrass us. Like, make something of yourself, you idiot.
I think we all know this, that in the Asian community, there's definitely the stereotype of you have to be smart, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. School's very important. And it sounds like your parents were both extremely accomplished. So with that, was there ever in your childhood or even in your adulthood a feeling of like not being smart enough?
Oh, you hit on it. You hit on it. That's the thing. That's the one. Oh my God, I wouldn't have found that if you hadn't said that. Yes. Let me clarify a little bit. So, okay, but my mom has 2 master's degrees. My dad is a professor. My mom's also a published short story writer in Telugu. And they both do various translation. My dad translates Telugu, Sanskrit, all these things. So they're incredibly accomplished. And I definitely, let me be clear. First of all, they both knew I was never going to be a doctor. They were like, oh, this disaster. Save yourselves. They never made me feel like I needed to be a doctor. But they did really care about education. Education was everything to them. Mm-hmm. And I was this wild child. Like, they could not figure out how to just get me to focus and do the thing. And the fact that I wanted to be an actor, I think my mom was really like, she wanted it for me. She was supportive of me. She was proud of me. I think my dad was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me with this shit. Like, you're not going to make a living as an actor. Like, don't be an idiot. Like, do you see yourself out there? I don't see you out there. Come on, figure something out. And, you know, he would try to get me to like go to business school or go to, you know, and I never would. And so I lived this very sort of zigzaggy life. I did go to school at University of Iowa. I got my undergrad in theater and my minor in Spanish. And then I left for a semester and went off to Chicago with a boyfriend and worked on a movie. And my dad was like in India at the time, and he got this answer machine message on his voicemail just being like, hey, I moved to Chicago and I dropped out of school. I did come back and I still graduated on time. I took summer courses. I got it all done. And then I ended up, you know, going to grad school, actually. That's how much I was like adamant. I lived in LA for a hot minute and tried to like make things happen. And that didn't quite go the direction I wanted it to go. So I went to grad school and I got my master's degree from ACT in San Francisco. And then I came back out here and just started, you know, pounding the pavement again. So it's been a very long journey. And I think my parents are both so proud of me now, but I think they were both, I think it was just terrifying for them. You know, there's this like stereotype that's so often put on the Asian community that it comes from like anger and all. But one of the things I finally came to, especially with my dad, was he wasn't angry. He was terrified for me. Like, how was I really going to survive in this country?
Yeah. And it's part of the first generation guilt kind of thing where our parents came to this country for a better life for us. And what am I going to be an actor? I have the same thing. So I totally get it.
Yes. And also just this experience of like, you know, I think there's just this idea of, you know, he was sort of like that immigrant experience is very much about survival mode, right? He and my mom came here and just survived. That was their big plan, is we just got to survive. And I think for their daughter to go off and go, I'm going to be an actor. It's like, who do you think you are? Who told you you get to be happy?
Right.
Where'd you learn that from? Who gave you that gift? That's not part of the deal. You just are supposed to survive. But I do think, obviously, I mean, after, you know, I feel bad. Obviously, there was like a real sense of like, oh, okay, but I still get messages from my dad, like emails just being like, so do you have any other career plans? Like, just in case, like he's still.
What's your backup plan?
What's your backup plan? That's it. And I do think I felt not smart enough. And I think that's part of the reason I went to grad school was like, I was like, well, at least if I get my master's, I've shown them I did something, right? I loved grad school. Well, grad school. I hated school. I was not a school person. It wasn't where I shined. I loved acting. I loved anything acting, dance, singing, all that stuff I loved. But if it was like class, I just couldn't have cared less.
And did you get bad grades?
No, I think I did. Well, let's see. High school, I didn't do great. College, I did better because I didn't have like, I wasn't around them, right? It was like my own thing. So it felt more. So college, I did pretty well.
And what was what was that like growing up in a family where your parents are both educators and smart and masters and all this thing, and you're in high school kind of like fucking shit up?
Again, they didn't know what to do with me and I didn't know what to do with them. We couldn't figure each other out. I mean, I think it was just like screaming matches. You know, most of my family life is just yelling at each other and then laughing, right? Like we are so loud and we still do it. Like it's just who we are. We just like kind of scream at each other and then we're like, oh, pass the word out, like whatever, pass the, like we don't even.
It's so great hearing this because there's such a parallel between Indian culture and Latin culture. I feel like there's so many. I mean, I think all ethnics have a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
But I think specifically Latin and Indian culture have, because we both have that colorism stuff going on. We both have that first generation guilt. We are newer immigrants in the country and the whole thing about what we look like and what we do for a living. It's really interesting.
And colorism runs so deep. It's so interesting. I mean, it is fascinating to me. And it's by fascinating, I mean deeply disturbing and damaging. But it's interesting to see that even now, when I look at film and TV, wow, like holy shit, it is just not moving. It's not moving. Little by little, it moves.
And speak to that a little bit, because here's the other thing. Like, you're definitely like brown, but you're not even like as dark as
many Indians. I know.
So to say that even you as kind of, because I feel like even Mindy Kaling is probably darker shades of brown than you are. And to see that like even at this lighter shade, you're feeling I'm still not light enough because what I'm seeing as far as the Indian girls on TV, they don't look like this.
I think it's been really interesting. And it was a big learning curve for me to even learn that I wasn't as dark as I thought I was, which is interesting. And actually, I would say the same to you, you're not dark, not that dark is bad, brown is gorgeous. And there's a gorgeous campaign that the South Asian community called Dark is Beautiful. But, India has a history of, lightening skin for being a movie star, very, very light skin. And I know that we see it in American culture all the time as well. And I think that so much of it is so ingrained in us. I remember being in India and one of our aunties, I was with my mom, and I remember one of the aunties saying, "Nalagundikara," which means, oh, she's dark, isn't she?
Oh, man.
Right. And I understood it. Like, I was like, I speak the language. Of course, my mom was like, you can shut up in a good way, in a protective way, not like, trying to repress it. But I'm probably a little bit darker than both of my parents. And then my mom's sister and brothers were much darker. So I don't know if that was a dialogue that was ever discussed with her family, but I know that they never made me feel like I was less than.
Mm-hmm.
The industry, however, I think is, it's disappointing to me to still see it so rampant, and I feel that way about a lot of issues in the industry, but I think that was another reason getting to do I Feel Bad meant so much to me, because I was showing a physical representation of Indian that just hasn't been seen on the regular.
And you had I remember seeing the beautiful, like, giant billboards, and it was like your face right in the middle and said, "I feel bad." And I have like an interesting story for you that I'm sure happened to so many Indian girls seeing these billboards. For me, when Jane the Virgin came out, and again, like Gina Rodriguez, not that dark, but slightly darker than the average Latin woman that they represent on TV. And I remember seeing the billboard with her, and it was with her face, and it said Jane the Virgin and Gina Rodriguez. And I'm like, oh my God, like a slightly darker brown skinned Latin woman is the lead of a show, and thinking, this is progress. And this was, a few years ago now, because the show had many seasons. Now it's done. And so maybe this was, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I think it's shifted a little bit. But even then, being my complexion, seeing a Latin girl who's still lighter than me, but darker than the average Latin girl that leads a show, and thinking, oh, wow, okay, great, we're moving in the right direction. So I'm sure there's probably so many girls in LA and everywhere else who want to be actors, who are Indian American, and saw you and were like, oh, or see Mindy Kaling, or see, and just think, okay, I have a shot.
For sure. I mean, I think Mindy's success has definitely like made a lot of South Asian women feel represented, which is so exciting. And also like it's possible, right? Like just knowing it's possible is everything. And I think that's a part of representation and the conversation around it that people often forget is if you're entirely excluded, the story actually is you don't get to. You don't matter. It's sometimes I think the language, we have hashtags and we have this and we have that, and there's nuance that's sometimes lost in the conversations. And I think that's inherent with social media in general. But the thing that shifts is all of a sudden when you start to see yourself represent versions of you represented, you go, oh my gosh, it's possible. I can maybe be out there. I can maybe go after my dreams. I can just feel like I matter on this earth, whether I want to be an actor or not.
And it's so beyond, I mean, we're in LA, we're in lockdown, we're talking to people through the internet. And it's interesting because the conversations could sometimes just be about like entertainment, but it also represents such a bigger picture because it's the same thing as far as like a woman of color or a little girl of color or a boy of color seeing, Barack Obama as president or seeing Kamala Harris as a political figure, just seeing these people of color do these amazing things. It's like representation does matter. And we need to see that. These little boys and girls need to see that so that they can feel like, oh, I can do that. And realizing now as an adult how little of that our generation had, how few people were in these positions for us to feel like, oh, maybe I can do that one day.
I know. And I think about that sometimes. And then I get even more like chills because I'm just like, I can't believe, people will often ask the question of like, who did you look up to growing up? You're like, I mean, there was like one person, and it's true. I did have, studied the Chowdhury, which is, she was in Mississippi Masala, who I just remember watching her and just thinking, oh, this could happen. Like I could do this, and I think about all the Indians out there who never got to get in, all the people who tried. And it was like, how do I just get my foot in the door? Because there's so many talented actors and actresses, as we both know, who are they just happen to be outside the loop because of who they're repped by or not repped by. They can't even get reps, but it has nothing to do with a lack of skill level. That's the craziest, most frustrating part, right? I think about all these incredibly talented humans who there was no way to even try to break that barrier. There was just no chance in hell. And I feel so honored that I've gotten to even, break a glass ceiling every now and again. On my tired days, I think about them, because we all have the tired days.
So going back to like the idea of not blank enough, and I think we've covered feeling not smart enough, maybe feeling not light enough, or not maybe whatever the standard of beauty in America is enough. Where have you come out on the other end? So did those feelings inspire something? Did those feelings ignite something?
Well, I think the journey was definitely, it took real work on my part and a lot of consciousness, a lot of therapy, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of awareness. Because what I realized was, as long as we internalize our self-worth, the messaging we're getting from the outside to be our self-worth, we're pretty much fucked. Like it just can. And what was happening was I found myself really getting eaten up by the industry because it was so painful to hear this kind of feedback over and over again. Thank God for therapy and for the ability to finally shed a lot of that messaging so that I could actually love myself for all the differences and weirdnesses or non-weirdnesses, but wonderful attributes that make me the unique human I am. I remember at one point sitting down at lunch with one of my managers and just saying, hey, so enough with the feedback. I don't want to hear it. If it's about my looks, if it's about, something, anything superficial, I don't want it.
You're getting feedback about your looks?
Over and over and over again. Oh, it was painfully cruel things. Painfully cruel. And I just said, I don't want to hear it anymore. I said, because it's irrelevant. I'm not trying to be a model. I'm not trying to sell my looks. I'm selling acting. I'm a storyteller. I'm selling my work. And if there's something where they're saying she was, this is where the audition went awry, or this is whatever, but more often than not, it's just somebody's bullshit opinion and it's irrelevant, And so I said, just stop telling me. You can just sort of cap it and keep it to yourself. It was usually around like being too ugly.
Oh, I just got chills when you said that. I hate that so much. It's so gross. It's so gross. And I do think things are changing. I do feel like Hollywood is maybe evolving a little bit.
Well, I think they're evolving in that they won't say it.
Right. They're still thinking it.
I look forward to the evolution of I'm not actually even thinking this way. I'm shifting my mindset and understanding that it's about the work. I look forward to that. But in the meantime, yes, I think it's shit.
But it's great that you were able to basically go above and beyond that and be like, fuck that. That's not important. I mean, that's not what I'm trying to do. Like you said, I'm not trying to win a beauty contest here. I'm trying to be a storyteller.
And really what I came around to was it's not true. These are just opinions of people who have been set in a certain system for so long that they believe this system of operating. But that doesn't mean it's true. It's still just a fucking opinion, right? And I think when that for me was the shift of empowerment as an actor, was when I shifted to the place of, and again, this took a lot of therapy and a lot of work. Like, I'm not saying I was just some fucking, genius who came to this. I'm saying I did a lot of work on myself to get there. But when I was able to say, you don't get to dictate my self-worth. You don't have a say in that. And, I think that's when I started to know when I nailed an audition, when I didn't, when I needed to, step up my game, when I needed to set a boundary, when I needed to go back and work harder, all of that. A lot of that we know ourselves, and I think it doesn't mean we don't need directors. My God, I need a good director. But I'm just saying, like, there's a connection with myself as an artist now that no one else gets to have a say in. And I think that was the biggest thing for me in the industry.
You took your power back.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's one thing to have those insecurities, which we all do from time to time, to feel like, ugh, I don't feel enough. I don't feel blank enough. But there's another thing to allow another person, an outside source, to make you feel like you're not something enough.
Yeah, it's hard as an actor, right? Because your whole system is built on, the whole way our careers are built is somebody has to give you the job and somebody has the shot to say, here's why we didn't like you for it. That's like over and over and over again. It's just like relentless, interviews. And then you get the job like once every, 5 years or whatever, and that shifts constantly. And that's great. But I can honestly say I wouldn't have gotten to I Feel Bad if I hadn't done that internal work for me, because I was still buying into the reality that they were selling me, which was that, well, I didn't deserve it. I looked like a troll, like, how could I? But again, I mean, I'm making that joke, but I feel good about myself and I feel beautiful. But what I'm saying is the messaging, if I was buying into that reality, it was going to definitely keep me low. It was going to keep me down. A friend of mine and I often talk about how one of the best ways to topple the patriarchy is to blatantly love yourself.
Ooh, I don't like that.
It's so real, right? As a woman, to just relentlessly celebrate yourself. As a woman of color, to just blatantly say, God, I love my fucking hips. Just like relish in it. And I think that is something that, trust me, I'm a highly sensitive human. I can get down. I can get sad. I can get hurt. But I constantly am finding new ways to replenish my love for myself and my self-care and my spirit, because I know that that is the best way I take that shit and tear it down.
Ooh, I love that.
And it's something that they can never take away. They can't take away our joy. They can't take away, because the reality is that's an old system. That's an old system of colonialism that's telling us we're not enough.
Yep. Is there anything else you want to talk about or leave us with? But I mean, honestly, that was fucking perfect.
No, I feel like we hit all the high notes and a couple low notes and everything in between.
Well, thank you, Sarayu.
Thank you, my love.
Thank you for listening to Not Blank Enough. Until next time, please take care of yourself and others, and know that you are more than enough. Check the show notes for links and info about today's guest. Please subscribe to Not Blank Enough wherever you get your podcast, and follow us on Instagram at Not Blank Enough Pod. Our show today was produced by Gracie Mercedes and Dave Hill, and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.